For those that don't know me, hi, my name is Jacob Coopersmith. I'm currently at Yeshivat Eretz Tzvi, and next year I'll be going to Cooper Union. All right, so let's start. Tzedakah, option or obligation. Tzedakah is a mitzvah, it's a commandment. What does that mean, option or obligation? That's what we have to start out with first. So what is option obligation? So there's a fundamental difference between a mitzvah kiyum and a mitzvah chiyuv. I'll explain what those are. A mitzvah kiyum is a mitzvah, it's a commandment that you just have to fulfill if it comes upon you. For example, tzitzit. If you have a four-corner garment, you need to put strings on bottom of it. But if you're not wearing a four-corner garment, you don't need to do it. And a mitzvah chiyuv is the opposite. It's chayav. You need to do it. For example, you need to listen to shofar. For example, you need to shake your lulav. And so that's what we're discussing. Is it a mitzvah kiyum, something that you can do if you have the option to, or something chiyuv, something you have to do? And so to start out with what I'm about to say, there's a joke I heard from my Rav Tabori, who's my main rabbi at Yeshivat Eretz Tzvi. There's a rabbi named Moshe who lived in a small village in Poland who became very angry about the lack of tzedakah in his community. So that year, on Yom Kippur, he made speeches to the congregation and prayed intensely that the rich should give more charity to the poor. When he got home, his wife asked, "And so, did God answer you?" Rav Moshe answered, "Well, he answered half of it. The poor are willing to accept." Well, just a classic Jewish joke. It has some truth to it. There are so many poor people out there that need help. And my shears tonight is discuss whether it's our option or obligation to help them. Do we help them out of the goodness of our heart or because God commands us to do so? So let's start with this first source in Devarim. If, however, there's a needy person among you. To me, this sounds like he's asking the Jews to do something nice. Like, please give poor, but it's not a commandment. It's not you have to do it. It's look, if you want to give poor, if you want to be nice, if you want to be a good person, give some tzedakah. So great, he's asking the Jews to give tzedakah. But is he giving us, is it really a choice? Or is it more like when parents ask kids, straighten up the first floor? Do you really have a choice? Or is it more just you have to do it? You're not going to say no. So that brings us to Yevamot. In Yevamot, it talks about three distinguishing things that separate Jews and non-Jews. So according to this Gemara, Harachamim, Abayashanin, Vegomle Chasidim. Mercy, we Jews, we have mercy, we forgive. We aren't even allowed to hold grudges. As mentioned in Parashat Kedoshim, Lo tikom velo titor. You're not allowed to hold grudges against people. The second, we experience shame. When we do something wrong, we realize it. We are embarrassed. There's even a story of King Menashe, who's considered one of the worst kings in the tribe of Judah. He was a descendant of David, and he was the worst. And yet, there's a Gemara that talks about him that when that this rabbi was discussing who are the worst kings, and then he decided it's Menashe. That night he went to sleep, and Menashe came to him in a dream, and Menashe said, "If you were in my position, you would have picked up your robe and ran faster." Because Menashe knew what he was doing was wrong. He just couldn't stop himself. Avodah Zarah, bowing down to idols, was very strong in those days, the want to do it. And so he wasn't able to stop himself, but he still had that shame. And lastly, and most importantly for our class right now, for our shir, is Milu Chasidim, righteous acts. There's a quote, Afu Afata. Just as God does, so should you do. God visits the sick, you should visit the sick. God buries the dead, you should bury the dead. And so, for example, when Abraham did his milah, when he got circumcised, God went to visit him the next pasuk. Moshe was buried by God. So just like God is doing these righteous acts, so should you. And most importantly, God giving you tzedakah, you should give tzedakah. Now, what's the tzedakah that God's giving you? Everything. God gives you everything. Everything that you have is His property. It's tzedakah that God is giving from you. It's charity. And so in Bereshit, well, before asking Abraham whether or not to destroy Sodom and Amorah, it says, "Ki yedativ leman asher yitzaveh panav ve'beto acharav v'shameru derech Adonai la'asot tzedakah mishpat." For I've singled him out. I've separated Abraham from the rest of the people, that he may instruct his children to keep the way of God by doing what is just and right. God chose Abraham because he knew he would teach his kids to be separate. He knew that for Yevamot, he knew that these three things would separate them. And most importantly, again, for our shears, giving Lu Chasidim, doing righteous act, giving tzedakah. So, according to this, the Jewish people are born with the want to act righteous. But where do we see that in Tanakh? through, throughout the books of Tanakh, throughout the prophets, the writings, uh, we never see tzedakah happen. And so, because of that, I think that's the cause for Shimon HaSadiq, one of the last of the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, the court of rabbis in the start of the second Beit HaMikdash, write down this very famous Mishnah. The Mishnah is as follows. Shimon HaSadiq haya misharek Knesset Gedolah. Shimon HaSadiq was from the last of the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, this group of rabbis. Hu haya omer, al shlosha devarim haolam amed. On three things the world stands. There's three pillars of the world. Alo Torah, ve'al avodah, ve'al gemilut chasedim. On Torah, on this God giving us the Torah, and that being the basis of our laws and our history and our theology. The next is avodah, worshiping God, worshiping in the Beit Hamikdash, worshiping in the temple. And nowadays, worshiping is avodah shebalev, so tefillah. That's how we worship nowadays. And lastly, most importantly, for our shir again, is doing righteous acts, giving tzedakah. It's considered one of the three pillars of the world. So learning Sefer Ezra with Rav Simon this year, he brought up this Malbim that I thought was very interesting and I really wanted to bring up. When reading Chazal, you have to look at the context when they say it. When somebody says something in the year 100, it's because something was happening in the year 100 for him to say it. If he said it in the year 1000, if he said it in the year 2000, he said it then because it needed to be said then. You could take it for all, it could last throughout generations, it could last to the test of time. But he said in that moment for a specific reason. So when looking at Shimon HaSadiq, looking at how he was the last of these great rabbis of the second Beit HaMikdash, and he looked at the previous generation of the first Beit HaMikdash, and he saw what made them fail versus what's going to make his generation succeed. And so he saw Zerubbabel, who was the leader of the first return, and with him he built the Beit HaMikdash, and that's where he learns Avodah from. He learns it from Zerubbabel and Yehoshua Kohen, who come back, build the Beit HaMikdash, and there's the creation of Avodah. Then he saw Ezra come back, Ezra Sofer, Ezra the writer. And Ezra saw the disarray the people were in, because although they had Avodah, although they had the worship, the Jewish people were failing. They were intermarrying, they didn't treat God correctly, and their society was falling. As seen in Melachi, they weren't doing it properly. They just didn't know Torah. And so that's where we learn Torah from. And after all this, after they had a functioning society, Nehemiah comes. And they were doing well, but they needed to do better. So when I was learning Amos with Rav Grumman, who's a rabbi here, Amos is talking to Malchut Yisrael, the 10 tribes, and he scolded them on how they were treating the poor, how they were treating the lower class. And now getting back to Ezra and Zerubbabel and getting back to Shimon HaSadiq, although the society might be able to start with the first two, if it doesn't get on to Gemilut Chasadim, the entire society will collapse after a few years. And so Nehemiah learned from his previous generation. Shimon HaSadiq is learning from Nehemiah. You need Gemilut Chasadim as well. So that's why Malbim used specific words such as he built, he strengthened, he fortified. Each person who came and built it up more and more, each person who had a builder kept making it stronger and stronger. And these were the three things that, according to Shimon HaSadiq, were the three things that led to the downfall of the first Beit HaMikdash, and the three things that will lead to the upkeep of the second Beit HaMikdash. And to add to this reason, I once heard a story about tzedakah and how much it truly matters. Many years ago, Josh Greenberg's father, Mr. Greenberg, owned a printing press in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And directly across the street was another printing press owned by Mr. Cohen. Growing up, Josh lived in a small tenement cramped with three brothers and two sisters. They barely had enough room to sleep, have their own privacy, their own rooms. They would go to bed hungry. And when Josh would go to his father's shop, he would see his father give Mr. Cohen, who was across the street, who had his own printing press, a letter when he asked for it, or extra pages, or fix the machine. And Josh got very upset by this. He felt as if Mr. Cohen was stealing from his family. As Josh got a little older, so his father started bringing him into the business. He started to get into daddy's business. And one day, Mr. Greenberg was feeling a bit ill, so Josh was old enough. He ran the store by himself. And on this day, Mr. Cohen asked to do an order, but he was missing his small italic H. So as usual, when missing something, he would go over to Mr. Greenberg, ask for it. And he knew that Mr. Greenberg always had every letter and he could always lend it to him. So he crosses the street, sees Josh there, and asks to borrow it. Josh, without his father there to cost them any business, says, "Sorry, we don't have it." Mr. Cohen's like, "Are you sure? I mean, you always have it. Your father never misses a letter." He says, "Yes, I'm sure we don't have it. Please, I have more work to do," and pushes him out of the store. So Mr. Cohen left. And later that week, after Shacharit on Saturday morning, Mr. Cohen went up to Mr. Greenberg and said, "I heard you lost a letter this week." Mr. Greenberg said, "What? I haven't heard anything about that." Mr. Cohen said, "Yeah, small italic H. When I came over this past week, your son Josh didn't have it." Mr. Cohen didn't suspect anything. He always knew that Mr. Greenberg would lend it. So if he did it, he must not have had it. And so Mr. Greenberg says, "So he must have lost it while I was sick. I'll ask him about it." When Mr. Greenberg went up to Josh and asked him about it, Josh said he knew where the letter was. It's where it always is. And so Mr. Greenberg got upset. So why did you give it to him? I always give it to him. And Josh said, "Because he's stealing our business. What do you mean? We need to make our parnasa. We need to make our living. And you keep giving our living away. I just want to be able to live comfortably. I want to have my own room. I don't want to go to sleep hungry." And Mr. Greenberg said, "If that's the case, then you should have just given the letter." Josh asked, "What do you mean?" Mr. Greenberg responded, "Every year during Neilah and Yom Kippur, God seals our fate for the upcoming year. Will we live or die? Marry or not? Kids or not? Good health or not? How much will we make in the upcoming year? And what God decides is what we get. You can't change what you get except for doing mitzvah and most importantly, tzedakah. A mitzvah, a commandment, is one thing you can't lose money on. And so tzedakah is one thing you can't lose money on. You spend it and God will reimburse you. So by lying and stealing from Mr. Cohen, you've lost money instead of gaining. Instead, he could have made money and you could have made more money. And instead, you lost out in doing the beautiful mitzvah tzedakah and you lost money because of it." Mr. Greenberg didn't just get this from nowhere. He didn't get this idea of, "Oh, God reimburses you from nowhere." It's said in the prophets. It's said by Malachi. Malachi said, "הביאו את כל המעשר לבית האוצר, ויהי טרף בביתי ורחני נע בזאת אמר השם צבאות. אם לא אבטח לכם את ארובות השמיים וכתרים לכם ברכה עד בלי די." This is happening when Malachi is rebuking the people, saying they aren't treating God properly, they aren't treating their friends properly, and they're not giving tzedakah. And he says, and Malachi saying the word of God says, "Test me, test me. Give the right amount of tzedakah. Do what you're supposed to do. Give leket, pe'ah, which are different types of tzedakah that have to do with your fields. Do it, and you will gain so much more than you could ever imagine. Giving tzedakah will get you more." Said straight by Malachi and repeated by Mr. Greenberg. But when looking at what we have already, it seems like it's still a mitzvah kiyum. It still seems like it's not mandatory. It's something that you're able to do. It's something that's very nice to do. It's something that could have a good impact for you and a good impact for the rest of the world. But it's not chayav. You don't have to do it. So it starts to change a little bit with Nehemiah. Nehemiah made a little bit of change. It's not exact change, which is why it says starts, but it starts it out. So Nehemiah is in Perek Yud, in the 10th Perek, he starts talking about the promises that Bnei Israel have been making, so that way they could keep up the second Beit HaMikdash. As mentioned before, the people living in Israel at that time were a little bit in disarray. They weren't the perfect return that they should have been. And so now they're making promises not to intermarry, promise to keep Shabbat, promise to keep Shemitah, which is letting your field rest on the 7th year. And most importantly, tzedakah to the Beit HaMikdash to upkeep it. They promise 1/3 of a shekel, which nowadays is about $5. So it's not that much money, but we're getting it from an entire population. It's just taxes. That's all they're asking for. They're asking for taxes. So it's not exactly tzedakah, but it's close enough. Now, Baba Batra, which is again right on, Rav Asi starts to make it into a mitzvah chiyuv. This is where it really flips over. It used to be when the Beit HaMikdash was around that you'd give the 1/3 shekel, you give the $5, you'd give it to the Beit HaMikdash. But when Rav Asi was living, he was living in the 4th century, 4th, 5th century, around that time. The second Beit HaMikdash had already fallen at that point, it already got destroyed. It was already Churban. And so instead of giving it to the Beit HaMikdash, which no longer exists, he said to give it to the poor. And he also says even more so, not only are you supposed to give it to the poor, the mitzvah tzedakah is the most important mitzvah. The pasuk says, that it says mitzvah. It says shekula tzedakah keneged kol mitzvah. שנאמר, ועמדנו עלינו מצוות וגומר. They took upon themselves mitzvah. And so but they're really only taking upon themselves tzedakah. So what does that mean? That charity is such an important such an important mitzvah that's as worth as much as every other mitzvah put together. So at this point, I really think tzedakah has become a chiyuv. And from Rav Asi, that's really where it started to chiyuv. It started where it become mandatory. And so it may not have started that way in the times of Moshe and the times of Yoshua and times of the judges, the kings. It may not have started that way, but by the time it got to the fourth, fifth century, it started to become a mandatory mitzvah. And so the Rambam lists eight different ways of giving tzedakah. And this is one of the most famous ways of giving tzedakah. So the first way is by disguising as someone else as like a job or a loan. Giving tzedakah without them knowing it's tzedakah is the best tzedakah you could give. Then there's giving it to a charity fund. For example, this yeshiva, very great charity fund to give to. Afterwards, there's giving to them where you don't know them and they don't know you. Giving to them where they don't know you, you don't know them. He just lists ways where it's the least embarrassing for the person giving and least embarrassing for the person getting. Because nobody wants to take tzedakah. Nobody wants to be a beggar. But some people really need it. Some people just don't have the luck in life to not need it. And so he just lists those ways. And I had a question when learning about this. Rambam, he organized his Mishneh Torah, his halachot, his laws, his Jewish laws, very carefully. And yet he put the laws of tzedakah, laws of charity, in the section that talks about ziraim, the section that talks about seeds, in the section that talks about plants, rather than in a section like ava, like love. And why is that? Shouldn't we be giving it from our love? And so no, this is a further proof that it's a chayav, that you have to give it. It isn't our choice to give tzedakah. We need to give. The same way God gives you rain is the same way God you need to listen to the shofar, is the same way you need to put on tefillin, is the same way you need to give tzedakah. You don't have a choice in the matter. It's you have to do it. You just have to. It's God's giving to you. You need to give it along because that's what he said to do. And so in Vayikra, it mentions different ways of giving tzedakah. So if you have a field, there's leke pe'ah shechacha, which is if you drop a few stalks of wheat, you have to give it to the poor. You have to cut off a section of your field to give it to the poor. If you forget any wheat on the field, it goes to the poor. And so many different forms of giving tzedakah. And the Shulchan Aruch, so he brings down a psak, he brings down a law that I see the most practiced by people nowadays. Because people nowadays don't have fields. They're not farmers. They can't just drop their stalks of wheat to give it to the poor. They can't cut off their field because they don't have a field. They don't have wheat. So what I've seen today is something called maaser kesafim, giving 1/10 of what you make. So let's say you're an accountant, and as an accountant, you make, throwing out a random number, you make $100,000. So according to Shulchan Aruch, and many rabbis hold like this, you're supposed to give 10,000 of that to tzedakah. There's different questions whether you give it before taxes, whether you give it after taxes. Though you could be more stingy if you want to. You could be more stingy, less stingy. It doesn't have to be exactly a tenth. Although they do say you shouldn't give less. You shouldn't give less than a tenth because then it becomes stingy. And if you really want to be such a tzaddik, you should give a 1/5. And so while you have to give, the amount isn't specified. It's up to you to decide. So that's out of your love. You could give. If you're making 100,000, you could give 20,000. You could give 40,000. You could give 10,000. You could give 5,000. It's up to you. Depends how much you are willing to give. And so while you have to give it, you could decide how much. So there is some choice in it. So to summarize, to conclude what I've been talking about, tzedakah could be looked at just an interesting and good idea. It's not just that. It's not just an interesting and good idea. It's not just nice. You not just do it out of your love. You do it because there's a very strong commandment that you have to do it. That society needs to run on stuff like this. It can't survive without this. And that God commanded you to do it and that you need to do it. That we need to be able to support each other. And there are vast amount of halachot on this. There are a vast amount of laws on how to give, when to give, what to give, and who to give, and many reasons as to why. And the most important thing to realize is our money isn't ours. It's not. The same way our food isn't ours. The same way we bless on our food, and that food was bought with this money. We need to thank God for giving us this money and give tzedakah with it. You could interpret how much you want to give, but you have to give. That's the most important part. And the vast majority of rabbis say Maaser Kasafim is the normal amount. You shouldn't give less than that, and you could give more than that, but you should give a tenth of your product. That being said, right now we're running we're running a charity, we're running a fund, and so that fund is to support people learning, is to support the Torah. It's supporting the avodah, the people praying, the students praying, kids like me who might not have as much money. So I would highly recommend donating. I'm actually sending my link in the chat if you guys want to donate. I'd greatly appreciate it. Um, yes, this whole share was just a plug for that, and thank you guys for coming. I hope this was interesting. I hope you guys have learned something. And I hope you guys could understand, you guys truly understand the importance of giving tzedakah. All right, that's it. Thank you. Have a good night.
Whoa, go Jacob!
Jacob.
Thank you, mom. Hi, mom.
Hi, Jacob.
You guys are glitching out a bit. Thank you guys for coming. Give tzedakah, give it to me. Donate to the yeshiva. And yeah, have a good night.